November 12th, 1943, 9:47 in the morning. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. Inside a captured maintenance depot near Tunis water dripped through holes in the corrugated steel roof. Each drop hit the concrete floor with a sound that echoed in the empty space. The building still smelled of diesel fuel and burnt rubber, the kind of smell that settles into your clothes and stays there. 4 men stood around a workbench in the center of the depot, German engineers, specialists, men who had spent their entire adult lives understanding how machines worked, how they failed, and how to make them work again. On the workbench sat the transmission assembly from an American M4 Sherman tank. The tank had been captured intact 3 weeks earlier after a minor engagement near the coast. The crew had abandoned it when the engine seized. The German recovery team had towed it back to this depot for study. Next to the transmission sat a thick manual, dark green cover. American military issue. The words Technical Manual TM9731B stamped across the front in black letters. The lead engineer was a man named Dieter Volkmann, 42 years old, average height, thin from rationing with hands that showed 2 decades of working with machinery. His fingers were stained with oil that never quite washed out. He wore the field grey uniform of the Wehrmacht, but the insignia on his collar identified him as technical staff, not combat troops. Dieter had been building and repairing German tanks since 1928. 15 years. He knew Panzer transmissions the way a surgeon knows anatomy. He could diagnose a fault by sound alone. The pitch of a grinding gear, the rhythm of a worn bearing, the subtle vibration that meant a clutch plate needed adjustment. He was very good at what he did. Behind him stood 3 other men. Klaus Reinhardt, 35, a younger engineer with less experience but sharp eyes for detail. Werner Holst, 50 years old, the eldest of the group who had learned his trade before the Great War. And Friedrich Berg, 38, a specialist in metallurgy who examined every component for manufacturing flaws. They had been ordered to study this American transmission, to understand it, to find its weaknesses. German High Command had been asking questions for months. Why did American armored divisions keep advancing? Their tanks were inferior. Everyone knew this. Thinner armor than German vehicles, smaller guns, mass-produced by workers with no tradition of precision engineering. And yet they kept coming. Units that should have been crippled by mechanical losses kept pressing forward. Tanks that should have been destroyed kept returning to battle. The numbers made no sense. German Panther tanks required specialized repair teams. A damaged transmission could remove a tank from service for weeks. Sometimes the repair crews never arrived. Sometimes they were killed trying to reach disabled vehicles. American Shermans with similar damage returned to the front lines in days, sometimes hours. The reports were consistent. The pattern was clear, but nobody understood why. Dieter wiped grease from his hands with a rag and reached for the American manual. The cover was worn. Someone had used this book extensively. The corners were bent. The spine showed stress marks. This was not a pristine technical document kept in a headquarters office. This was a field manual, a working manual, something that had been carried in a tank and referenced regularly. He opened it to the first page. What he saw there made him stop. The page showed a simple diagram. The Sherman transmission drawn in clean, bold lines. No artistic detail, no shading, just the essential shape of the assembly rendered with technical precision. The transmission was divided into numbered sections. Module 1, Module 2, Module 3. Each section clearly marked. Beside each module was a single line of text. Remove and replace. That was all. No instructions for disassembly. No procedures for internal adjustment, no calibration specifications, just those 3 words repeated for each major component. Remove and replace. Dieter stood very still. He had expected complexity. He had expected secrets. German engineering manuals were comprehensive documents. They explained not just what to do, but why. They provided the theory behind each procedure. They assumed the reader was a trained specialist who understood mechanical principles. This American manual assumed nothing of the sort. Behind him, Klaus spoke. What does it say? Dieter did not answer immediately. He turned to the next page, then the next. He was looking for the section on transmission repair. In a German manual, this section would run 60 pages or more. Detailed procedures for disassembling the gear train. Precise measurements for adjusting clutch plates. Step-by-step instructions for realigning drive shafts. Specifications for bearing clearances measured in thousandths of an inch. He found the American section. It was 4 pages long. 4 pages. The procedure was simple. Drain the fluid. Disconnect the drive shaft. Remove 12 mounting bolts. Lower the transmission from the hull using a hoist. Install a replacement unit from supply. Reconnect. Refill. Test. The old transmission was not to be repaired in the field. According to this manual, it would be sent to a rear depot. There it would either be rebuilt to factory specifications or scrapped entirely. Dieter read the procedure 3 times. He did not speak. The other men noticed his silence. They waited. The sound of water dripping through the damaged roof filled the space, each drop distinct against the concrete. Finally, Dieter placed the manual on the workbench and stepped back. What troubled him was not the simplicity. What troubled him was what the simplicity implied. German field mechanics were highly trained specialists. It took years to develop the skills needed to diagnose and repair a Panzer transmission. A good mechanic could hear a problem, identify the exact component that was failing, then spend 8 or 10 hours carefully adjusting the machinery until it ran smoothly again. This skill was considered essential. It was the foundation of German armoured maintenance. Every Panzer division relied on these men. Their expertise had been cultivated through formal apprenticeships, practical experience, and continuous training. The American manual suggested this skill was unnecessary. Worse than that. The American manual suggested this skill was inefficient. A German field mechanic might spend 8 hours repairing a transmission. He would need specialized tools, replacement gaskets, calibration equipment, absolute focus. Any mistake would require starting over. Any interruption would cost time. An American crew following this manual could replace an entire transmission in under 2 hours. They needed a hoister replacement unit from supply and a basic toolkit. No special training, no years of apprenticeship, no master mechanic supervising their work. The German approach produced 1 repaired tank after 8 hours of expert labor. The American approach produced 1 operational tank after 2 hours of ordinary labor. And the American approach could be performed by any crew at any location with minimal supervision. The implications made Dieter's chest feel tight. If American factories could produce enough replacement modules, and if American logistics could deliver those modules to forward areas, then American armored units would have unlimited mechanical endurance. Every breakdown would become a 2-hour delay instead of a week-long absence. Every damaged component would become a minor inconvenience instead of a critical loss. Werner moved closer to the workbench. "Let me see." Dieter handed him the manual without speaking. Werner read for several minutes. His expression did not change, but his breathing became slower, more deliberate. When he finished, he set the manual down carefully. "This is not a repair manual," Werner said quietly. "No," Dieter replied. "This is a disposal manual." "Yes." Klaus picked up the manual next. He was younger, less experienced. But he understood immediately what he was looking at. His face showed something between confusion and disbelief. "They throw away entire transmissions. They replace them," Dieter said. "But that is wasteful." "Is it?" The question hung in the air. Friedrich the metallurgist spoke for the first time. "If the replacement costs less than the repair time, it is not wasteful. It is practical." Werner looked at him sharply. "You cannot put a price on craftsmanship." "War does exactly that," Friedrich replied. "Every hour a tank sits disabled is an hour the enemy advances. If you can repair it in 8 hours or replace it in 2, which choice keeps more tanks in the fight?" No one answered. Dieter turned away from the workbench and walked to the nearest window. Rain streaked the glass. Through the water he could see the motor pool beyond, rows of German vehicles, half of them sitting idle awaiting parts that might never arrive, awaiting specialist teams stretched impossibly thin across the entire North African theatre. He thought about his son. Lucas was 16 years old, training right now to be a tank crewman. In 6 months, maybe less, he would be assigned to a Panther or a Tiger. He would climb into a machine that represented the peak of German engineering. Powerful, sophisticated, deadly. And if that machine broke down in the field, if the transmission failed or the engine seized, Lucas would sit inside awaiting a repair team that might not come. While American crews in their inferior tanks would unbolt the damaged component and install a replacement in 2 hours. Dieter touched the inside pocket of his uniform. He carried a photograph there. Lucas, at 14, standing next to the family car, smiling. The boy wanted to serve, wanted to be part of something larger than himself, wanted to defend the homeland. Dieter wanted him to survive. And this manual, this simple American manual with its crude diagrams and minimal text, suggested that survival might depend less on superior engineering and more on superior logistics. That was a hard thing to accept. Behind him, Klaus was still studying the manual. "The procedures are so basic," Klaus said. "Any common soldier could follow these steps." "That is the point," Werner replied. "But what about understanding the mechanism? What about diagnosis? What about—" "They do not need to understand," Dieter interrupted, still looking out the window. They only need to execute. The understanding is built into the system itself. He turned back to face the others. We train men to think, to adapt, to solve problems they have never encountered before. That takes years, and when one of those men is killed, all that knowledge dies with him. The Americans train men to follow procedures. That takes weeks, and when one of those men is killed, the procedure remains. Another man picks up the same manual and continues the work. Friedrich nodded slowly. Replaceable mechanics for replaceable parts. Yes. Werner's face showed something close to anger now. This is an insult to the profession, to treat skilled mechanics as interchangeable labor. It is not an insult, Dieter said quietly. It is a different philosophy entirely. He moved back to the workbench and placed his hand on the Sherman transmission. We build machines meant to last forever. They build machines meant to last long enough. We train irreplaceable specialists. They create replaceable procedures. We perfect individual units. They standardize entire systems. Which approach works better when your specialists are dead and your factories are burning? The question was rhetorical. They all knew the answer. They could see it in the reports. They could see it in the field. American armor kept moving. German armor kept awaiting repairs. Dieter looked at Klaus. Remove this transmission. Sir, I want to see how it comes out. Follow the American procedure exactly. Use only basic tools. Klaus hesitated, then nodded. He examined the manual again, studying the diagrams. Then he selected a wrench from the tool cabinet. Standard size, 9/16 inch. The other engineers watched. Klaus began with the mounting bolts. 12 of them arranged around the perimeter of the transmission housing. He worked methodically, following the sequence shown in the diagram. Every bolt was the same size. Every bolt required the same wrench. Every bolt came free with the same amount of effort. No special tools needed, no custom fittings, no individual adjustment. When Klaus reached the driveshaft connection, he paused. The coupling here, he said. On a Panther, this would require alignment. Each vehicle is slightly different. You have to know the specific tolerances for that particular tank. What does the manual say? Dieter asked. Klaus checked. It says, disconnect the coupling. That is all. Then disconnect it. Klaus did. The coupling separated with simple bolts. No alignment required. No individual variation. The pattern continued. Each step in the procedure worked exactly as the manual described. No surprises, no complications, no places where specialist knowledge was required. 45 minutes after Klaus began the transmission, sat on the floor of the depot completely removed from the tank. The German engineers stood in silence. 45 minutes. A comparable operation on a Panther would have taken 4 hours, minimum, and that was with an experienced crew who knew that specific vehicle. This American transmission had come out of a tank that none of them had seen before, using a manual they had just read for the first time with basic tools. Dieter knelt beside the transmission. He examined the mounting points. Then he went to the tool cabinet and retrieved a set of precision calipers. These were expensive instruments, capable of measuring to 1/10,000th of an inch. Dieter had owned this particular set for 12 years. He trusted them completely. He measured the distance between mounting bolt holes. Then he checked the specification listed in the American manual. The deviation was less than 3/10,000ths of an inch. He measured again. Different mounting points, same result. A third time, same result. Dieter stood slowly. He felt something cold settling in his stomach. This level of precision meant something very specific. It meant that any replacement transmission from any American factory would fit this vehicle. Not approximately. Not with minor adjustment. Exactly. And if that was true for transmissions, it was likely true for everything else. Engine mounts, drive wheels, track assemblies, turret rings, electrical systems, fuel pumps, cooling assemblies. Every major component built to tolerances so precise that complete interchangeability was guaranteed. The German team understood precision manufacturing. Germany had pioneered many of its techniques. German engineering was respected throughout the world for exactly this reason. But German precision was used to build unique, optimized components. Each piece fitted to its specific location during assembly. A Panther transmission was not quite the same as the next Panther transmission, close but not identical. Each required individual attention from a skilled mechanic who knew how to work with those small variations. American precision served a different purpose. American precision eliminated variation entirely. The Germans built parts that were perfect for one vehicle. The Americans built parts that were perfect for every vehicle. Werner was examining the shipping container that had held the transmission. It was still in the depot, pushed against one wall. Wooden crate, reinforced corners, rope handles. There are markings here, Werner said. Dieter joined him. The crate bore stamps from multiple locations: a factory in Indiana, 3 separate inspection checkpoints, dates, serial numbers, quality control signatures, and something else. A card attached to the interior of the crate. Heavy paper printed with a grid. 17 separate measurements listed in rows. Each measurement had a specified tolerance range. Each tolerance had been verified and signed off by an inspector. Dieter lifted the card carefully. The signatures were accompanied by employee numbers. Beneath each number, someone had written a name in pencil: Ruth Morrison, Dorothy Hayes, Betty Sullivan, women's names. "These inspectors," Friedrich said, reading over Dieter's shoulder, "these are not engineer designations." "No," Dieter agreed. "Then who are they?" "Factory workers. Ordinary workers trained to use measuring instruments and follow quality control procedures." Werner made a sound that might have been a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "They trust the precision of their most critical components to factory workers with no engineering background." "They trust the process," Dieter said. "The workers do not need to understand why a tolerance matters. They only need to verify that it meets specification. The understanding is built into the specification itself." He set the card down carefully. "We need master craftsmen to produce quality. They have created a system where quality is guaranteed by the process, not by the individual." The rain continued outside. The sound filled the depot. None of the men spoke for a long time. Finally, Klaus broke the silence. "What do we do with this information?" Dieter looked at the transmission sitting on the floor, then at the manual on the workbench, then at the shipping crate with its quality control card. "We document everything," he said. "We write a comprehensive report. We explain exactly what we have found here." "Will anyone listen?" Werner asked. "I do not know. Will it change anything?" Dieter thought about his son, about Lucas climbing into a Panther tank 6 months from now, about what would happen when that tank inevitably broke down in the field. "I do not know that either," he said quietly. "But we will do our duty. We will report what we have learned." He moved to the workbench and opened a notebook. The pages were blank. He uncapped his pen. At the top of the first page, he wrote the date, November 12th, 1943. Then he began to write. "The American M4 Sherman employs a modular design philosophy fundamentally different from German armored vehicle construction. The following analysis examines the implications of this approach for battlefield maintenance and operational availability." The words came slowly at first, then faster. Outside, the weather continued its steady assault on the damaged roof. The depot remained cold. The concrete floor stayed wet. But Dieter wrote. He wrote about tolerances and interchangeability, about replacement versus repair, about training times and logistics chains, about what happens when you design a system that does not require exceptional people to function. He wrote until his hand cramped, and somewhere in the back of his mind a thought formed that he did not want to acknowledge but could not ignore. The war might already be lost, not on any battlefield, not in any engagement, but here, in this principle, in this philosophy. Germany had built an army that depended on exceptional individuals performing exceptional work under exceptional pressure. America had built an army that could function with ordinary individuals following ordinary procedures under ordinary circumstances. When the exceptional individuals were gone, the German system would degrade rapidly. When ordinary American soldiers died, the American system would simply continue. That was the difference, and that difference, Dieter suspected, would decide everything. He looked at the photograph of his son again. Then he returned to writing his report. The manual sat on the workbench, its pages still open to the simple diagram. 3 words that might mean more than all the technical sophistication Germany had spent decades developing. 3 words that suggested the war was already over, even though the fighting would continue for years. Dieter wrote faster. 2 weeks passed. The weather had cleared, but the depot remained cold. November in North Africa brought chill winds that cut through the damaged roof and settled into the concrete, the kind of cold that made metal painful to touch with bare hands. Dieter Volkmann sat at the same workbench where the Sherman transmission still rested. Around him, stacks of documents had accumulated: American training manuals, maintenance procedures, supply chain documentation, captured materials that German intelligence had been collecting for months and had finally delivered to his team for analysis. He had not slept well in days. Every document he read confirmed what he had begun to suspect 2 weeks earlier. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion, and that conclusion was becoming harder to ignore. The other engineers had dispersed to their regular duties. Klaus was in the field with a Panzer battalion. Werner had been reassigned to a factory inspection in Germany. Friedrich remained at the depot, but he spent most of his time analyzing metal samples from destroyed vehicles. Dieter was alone with the American documents.
He opened a new manual. This one was different from the technical maintenance guide. The cover read, Training Program Vehicle Maintenance Specialist Course. He read the course outline. 8 weeks. 8 weeks total training time to produce a qualified Sherman mechanic. The German equivalent training program ran 2 years, minimum. Most mechanics apprenticed for 3 or 4 years before they were considered truly competent. 8 weeks. Dieter turned the pages slowly. The American training was divided into clear segments. Week 1 and 2 covered tool identification and basic mechanical principles. Week 3 and 4 focused on bolt removal procedures and torque specifications. Week 5 and 6 taught assembly replacement techniques. Week 7 and 8 consisted of field practice exercises. No advanced theory.
No diagnostic training. No instruction on how to analyze unfamiliar problems. Just procedures. Do this then this. Check this measurement. If it exceeds tolerance, replace this component. The manual included sample test questions. Dieter read through them. Question 7. When removing a transmission assembly, what is the correct sequence for disconnecting the drive shaft? Question 12. If fluid pressure exceeds specifications, what is the proper response? The answers were multiple choice. The correct response to question 12 was not diagnose the cause of excess pressure. It was replace the pump assembly and forward the damaged unit to depot maintenance. No analysis required. No troubleshooting, just execution of documented steps. Dieter closed the manual and rubbed his eyes. He thought about his own training. 1926, when he was 16 years old. His father had taken him to the Daimler-Benz factory in Stuttgart, introduced him to master mechanic Hoffmann, a man with 40 years of experience who could diagnose any mechanical problem by sound and touch alone. Dieter had spent 4 years learning from Hoffmann, not just procedures, but principles. How to understand the relationship between components, how to visualize forces and stresses inside an assembly, how to solve problems that had never been encountered before. It had been difficult, demanding. Many apprentices failed, but those who succeeded became true craftsmen. Men who could adapt to any situation, men whose knowledge and skill were irreplaceable. That was the German way. The American way was different. The American way assumed that individual knowledge was a weakness, not a strength. That expertise concentrated in a few specialists created vulnerability. That the best system was one that required the minimum possible skill from the maximum number of people. Dieter stood and walked to the window. Outside he could see the motor pool. A Panther sat idle awaiting a new final drive assembly. The part had been ordered 3 weeks ago. It still had not arrived. The specialized factory that produced final drives for Panthers was operating at reduced capacity after an Allied bombing raid. No other factory could produce that exact component. So the Panther sat, perfectly functional except for one broken part. 45 tons of sophisticated engineering rendered useless because a single component had failed, and the replacement system could not respond fast enough. Dieter wondered how many Panthers were sitting idle across the entire German army. How many Tigers? How many vehicles that could be fighting but instead were immobilized? Awaiting parts. Awaiting specialists. Awaiting a logistics system that was stretched beyond its capacity. He returned to the workbench and opened another document. This one was a production report. American manufacturing data captured from a supply depot. The numbers were staggering. Sherman tank production 49,234 units through October 1943. Panther tank production 6,000 units through the same period. The ratio was bad enough, 8-1. But Dieter knew that production numbers told only part of the story. What mattered was availability. How many of those tanks were actually in the field operational ready to fight? He found a German after-action report from Tunisia. The document included vehicle availability rates for various engagements. Panther availability, 45% on average. For every 100 Panthers produced, only 45 were typically available for combat. The rest were in repair awaiting parts or being transported to maintenance facilities. He searched through the captured American documents for comparable data. Sherman availability, 85%. 85%. Dieter did the calculation in his head. 49,234. Sherman's, at 85% availability, meant 41,849 tanks in the field. 6,000 Panthers, at 45% availability, meant 2,700 tanks in the field. The effective ratio was not 8-1, it was 15-1. 15 American tanks in combat for every German tank actually available to fight. And that assumed equal combat losses, which was not the case. American logistics could replace destroyed tanks faster than German logistics could repair damaged ones. The numbers were crushing. Dieter sat down heavily. He pulled out a sheet of paper and wrote the calculations clearly. Then he stared at what he had written. Germany was not losing tank battles because American tanks were superior. Germany was losing the war of availability, the war of logistics, the war of systems. And that war had been decided before the first shot was fired. The door to the depot opened. Friedrich entered carrying a metal sample case. He saw Dieter at the workbench and paused.
You are still working on this?
Yes.
For 2 weeks?
Yes.
Friedrich set down his case and approached the workbench. He glanced at the open documents, the production figures, the availability calculations.
Bad? He asked. Worse than bad.
Friedrich pulled over a stool and sat. Tell me.
Dieter explained. The training differences, the replacement philosophy, the availability ratios. He spoke quietly, methodically, laying out each piece of evidence. When he finished, Friedrich was silent for a long moment. This is why they keep advancing, Friedrich said finally. Yes. Not because their tanks are better, because their tanks are always there. Yes. Friedrich reached for one of the manuals, flipped through the pages, stopped at a diagram showing a modular engine assembly. I have been analyzing their metallurgy, Friedrich said. The steel quality is inferior to ours. The casting techniques are crude, but the standardization is perfect.
Every part from every factory is identical within tolerances I have never seen before. He set down the manual.
We make better individual parts. They make perfect systems of adequate parts. And in war, which matters more? Dieter asked. Friedrich did not answer immediately. Dieter pulled out another document, one he had been avoiding. A field report from the Eastern Front. December 1942. The account described a Panther battalion that had suffered transmission failures across multiple vehicles during the winter offensive. The failures were not catastrophic, not combat damage, just normal mechanical wear accelerated by extreme cold. 3 vehicles broke down on the same day. The battalion had 2 specialist mechanics qualified to repair Panther transmissions. Both men worked around the clock. They managed to repair 1 vehicle in 4 days. While they worked, the other 2 Panthers sat idle. On the 5th day, a Soviet counterattack hit the battalion's position.
The 2 idle Panthers were captured intact. The specialist mechanics were killed. The single repaired Panther was destroyed by artillery. The battalion effectively ceased to exist as a fighting unit because 3 transmissions failed and the repair system could not respond fast enough. Dieter pushed the report across the workbench to Friedrich. Read the last paragraph. Friedrich scanned to the end. The commanding officer notes that if replacement transmissions had been available, all 3 vehicles could have returned to service in 1 day. Yes. But replacement transmissions were not available because we do not build systems that way. No. Friedrich handed back the report. How many times has this happened? Across all fronts? I do not know. But the pattern is consistent. Dieter opened his notebook, turned to a page covered in calculations and notes. A Panther breakdown requires specialist attention. If the specialist is available, repair takes 3 to 4 weeks. If the specialist is not available, the tank is abandoned. A Sherman breakdown requires basic labor. If spare components are available, replacement takes 2 hours. If components are not available, the crew awaits resupply, which typically occurs within 24 hours. The American system has shorter repair times and shorter resupply times. It is faster at every stage. Friedrich leaned back. What are you going to recommend in your report? The truth, which is that we cannot compete with this system using our current approach, that we have lost the war of logistics before we even understood we were fighting it. They will not want to hear that. No. They will say you are being defeatist. Probably. They will ignore the report. Dieter looked at the photograph of his son still tucked in his notebook. I know. But he would write it anyway. Because someone needed to document what was happening. Someone needed to explain why German armor, despite its technical superiority, was losing the war of availability. Someone needed to tell the truth, even if no one wanted to hear it. Friedrich stood. I have metallurgy samples to analyze. But Dieter, before I go, let me say this. Dieter looked up. You are a good engineer, a brilliant engineer, and you are doing the right thing by documenting this, but you need to understand something. What? The system we have built, the philosophy we follow it, is embedded in our entire culture, in how we train workers, in how we design factories, in what we value as a society. We value craftsmanship, excellence, the perfection of individual skill. America values efficiency, production, the optimization of systems over individuals. To change our approach would require changing everything, our factories, our training schools, our entire industrial philosophy.
And we are in the middle of a war. There is no time to rebuild. Friedrich moved toward the door, then paused. We are watching the future defeat the past, Dieter, and there is nothing we can do about it. He left. Dieter sat alone in the cold depot. He thought about Friedrich's words, about cultural philosophy, about the impossibility of fundamental change during wartime. Then he thought about something else. The human cost. He pulled the photograph of Lucas from his notebook, studied his son's face. 16 years old, eager, proud to serve. In 6 months, Lucas would be in a Panther. And when that Panther broke down, Lucas would be one of the men sitting inside, vulnerable, exposed, awaiting rescue that might never come. The thought made Dieter's hands shake. He set the photograph down carefully on the workbench. Then something happened that had not happened since Dieter was a child. He began to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically.
Just quiet tears running down his face while he sat alone in an abandoned depot in North Africa, surrounded by documents that proved his son was going to die, and there was nothing he could do to prevent it, because the system was wrong, and the system could not be changed, and men would die because of it. His son would die because of it. Dieter put his face in his hands and wept. For his son, for all the sons, for all the men who would sit in broken tanks awaiting repairs that would never arrive, for all the specialist mechanics who would die trying to keep an impossible system functioning, for all the genius and skill and craftsmanship that would be wasted because the philosophy was fundamentally wrong. He cried until there were no more tears. Then he wiped his face with the sleeve of his uniform, picked up his pen, and continued writing his report. Because even if it changed nothing, even if Lucas still died, even if Germany still lost, someone had to document the truth. Someone had to explain that wars are not won by exceptional individuals, they are won by sustainable systems, and Germany had built its entire military around exceptional individuals. He wrote for 3 more hours. When he finally stopped, it was dark outside. The depot was freezing. His hand ached from gripping the pen, but the report was nearly complete. 47 pages. Every observation documented, every calculation verified, every conclusion supported by evidence. Tomorrow he would finish it. And then he would submit it. And then he would wait to see if anyone listened. He already knew they would not. But he would do it anyway. For Lucas. For all the sons who deserved better than a system that could not save them. Dieter gathered his papers and locked them in the document case. Then he walked out into the cold North African night, thinking about his son and wondering how much time they had left before the inevitable happened. December 15th, 1943. The report was complete. 47 pages. Every observation documented. Every calculation verified, every conclusion supported by evidence. Dieter Volkmann had spent 5 weeks writing it. 5 weeks reviewing captured American documents, analyzing maintenance procedures, calculating availability rates, and documenting the systematic differences between German and American approaches to armored vehicle logistics. The final document sat on his desk in a leather folder. Official Wehrmacht technical report format. Proper headers, numbered sections, charts and diagrams inserted at appropriate intervals. He had titled it Analysis of American Modular Maintenance Systems and Implications for German Armored Operations. Professional, neutral, the kind of language that would not immediately be dismissed as defeatist propaganda. But the conclusions were devastating. Dieter read through the summary one final time before sealing the report for submission. The American military has developed a maintenance philosophy fundamentally incompatible with German traditions of precision engineering. This philosophy prioritizes operational availability over technical perfection. It achieves superior battlefield effectiveness not through better individual components, but through superior systems integration. Key findings. American mechanics require 8 weeks of training versus German requirement of 2 years. American field repairs average 2 hours versus German average of 40 hours. American availability rates exceed 85% versus German rates below 50%. Effective American armor superiority is 15-1 when accounting for availability differentials. Recommendation: German armored forces cannot compete with American logistics using current maintenance doctrines. Fundamental restructuring of training, production, and supply systems is required. This restructuring would require minimum 18 months and complete retooling of existing factory infrastructure. Conclusion. The window for implementing necessary changes has closed. American systems' advantage is now insurmountable within the time frame of current conflict. He had written it as carefully as possible, documented every claim, provided mathematical proof for every calculation. It would not matter. He knew this, but he sealed the report anyway and prepared it for courier delivery to High Command. 3 days later, Dieter received orders to report to a facility outside Tunis for a presentation of his findings. He arrived at 0900 hours on December 18th. The building was a converted administrative office. French colonial architecture now serving as a temporary headquarters for Wehrmacht technical staff in North Africa. Inside a conference room on the second floor, 3 senior officers waited. General Heinrich Hoffmann, Logistics and Supply Coordination. A practical man who understood numbers. General Ernst Steiner, Armored Warfare Doctrine. A traditionalist who had helped design the Panther specifications. Colonel Wolfgang Adler, Technical Services, an engineer by training now responsible for maintenance operations across the theatre. Dieter stood at attention while the generals reviewed his report. No one spoke. The only sound was pages turning. 15 minutes passed. Finally, Hoffmann looked up. "Sit down, Volkmann." Dieter sat. Hoffmann tapped the report with one finger. "Your analysis is thorough." "Thank you, sir." "Your mathematics is sound." "Yes, sir." "Your conclusions are unacceptable." Dieter said nothing. Steiner leaned forward. "You are suggesting that American maintenance procedures are superior to German engineering standards." "No, sir. I am suggesting that American maintenance procedures are more effective for sustaining combat operations." "That is the same thing." "With respect, General, it is not. German engineering produces superior individual machines. American systems produce superior operational availability. These are different measures of success. In peacetime, individual quality dominates. In extended industrial warfare, systemic efficiency dominates." Steiner's face hardened. "You are saying we are losing. I am saying our maintenance philosophy cannot sustain the operational tempo required to win." The room went very quiet. Colonel Adler spoke for the first time. "Your recommendations call for complete restructuring of our training and production systems." "Yes, sir." "In the middle of a war." "Yes, sir." "That is impossible." "I know, sir." Adler blinked. "Then why recommend it?" "Because the analysis required complete conclusions, even if those conclusions cannot be implemented." Hoffmann stood and walked to the window, looked out over the city. "How long have you been studying this Volkmann?" "5 weeks of intensive analysis, sir, but I have been observing the patterns for nearly a year." "And you are certain of your findings?" "Yes, sir." "The 15-to-1 availability ratio, you are certain?" "The numbers vary by theatre and time frame, but the pattern is consistent. American availability rates exceed ours by a factor of 2. Combined with their production superiority, the effective combat ratio is between 12-to-1 and 18-to-1, depending on battlefield conditions." Hoffmann turned from the window. "That means for every Panther we have in combat, they have 15 Shermans." "Effectively, yes, sir." "And our Panthers are superior machines." "In direct combat, yes, sir. A Panther can destroy 3 or 4 Shermans before being overwhelmed." "But if they have 15 Shermans for every Panther, then superior individual performance is insufficient, sir." Steiner stood abruptly. "This is defeatist nonsense. You are suggesting that German technical excellence is worthless, that our engineering tradition, our skilled craftsmen, our precision manufacturing, all of it, is inferior to American mass production." Dieter chose his words carefully. "I am suggesting that excellence and effectiveness are not the same thing, sir. Our tanks are excellent, but they are not available when needed. American tanks are adequate, but they are always available. In war, available beats excellent." Steiner's hands were shaking. "I will not accept that. I will not accept that crude American manufacturing defeats German precision." "The battlefield data suggests otherwise, sir." "Then the battlefield data is incomplete." Hoffmann raised his hand. "Enough." He returned to his seat, opened the report to a marked page. "Volkmann, you state here that changing our system would require 18 months minimum." "Yes, sir. That is an optimistic estimate." "Full implementation would likely take 24 to 30 months. And we would need to retool every maintenance depot, retrain, every mechanic restructure, our entire spare parts production and distribution network." "Yes, sir." "While continuing to fight." "Yes, sir." Hoffmann closed the report. "Then we cannot do it." "No, sir. Even if everything you have written is correct, we cannot implement the changes required." "I understand, sir. Our factories are already committed to current production methods. Our training schools are already operating at capacity with existing curricula. Our logistics networks are already strained beyond sustainable levels."
We do not have the resources to rebuild our entire maintenance philosophy while simultaneously fighting a multi-front war. Dieter said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Hoffman was right. Every word was correct. Germany could not change its fundamental approach. Not now. Not in the middle of the largest war in human history. The system was locked in place by its own momentum. Colonel Adler spoke quietly. What you are telling us, Volkmann, is that we have already lost. Not this battle or that campaign, but the war itself. Lost it in our factories and training schools years before the fighting even began. Yes, sir. That is exactly what I'm telling you. The silence that followed was absolute. 3 senior officers sitting in a room in North Africa looking at a report that explained in precise mathematical terms why their army could not win. Finally, Hoffman stood. Your report will be forwarded to Berlin. It will be reviewed by senior staff. I suspect they will reach the same conclusion we have reached here. Which is, Dieter asked, that your analysis is correct and your recommendations are impossible. So nothing will change? No, nothing will change. Hoffman picked up the report. But your work is important, Volkmann. Someone needs to document what is happening. Someone needs to explain why, even if we cannot fix it. Your report will be filed. It will become part of the historical record. And perhaps after this war is over, someone will read it and understand. Understand what, sir? That wars are not won by the best weapons. They are won by the best systems. And we built the wrong system. He extended his hand. Dieter stood and shook it. You are a good engineer, Volkmann. You have done your duty. Now return to your post and continue doing what you can with what we have. Yes, sir. The meeting was over. Dieter left the building and walked out into the December heat. He had just spent 5 weeks proving that Germany would lose the war, and the generals had agreed with him, and nothing would change. He thought about his son, about Lucas training to crew a Panther, about the boy's excitement at being part of something important, about how that boy would someday sit in a disabled tank awaiting repairs that would never come, and there was nothing Dieter could do about it. Nothing at all. He walked back to the depot through streets that would belong to the Allies within months. Everything he had discovered, everything he had documented, all of it was true. And all of it was useless. April 23rd, 1945. 17 months after Dieter submitted his report. The war in Europe was ending. Soviet forces were in Berlin. American and British armies occupied most of Western Germany. The Third Reich was collapsing. Dieter Volkmann was still alive. He was no longer in North Africa. That theatre had fallen in May 1943. He had been transferred back to Germany, assigned to a maintenance depot outside Stuttgart, the same city where he had learned his trade 20 years earlier. Everything was different now. The depot was operating at perhaps 30% capacity. Spare parts had stopped arriving months ago. Most of the skilled mechanics had been killed or captured. The vehicles that came in for repair mostly sat in the yard, immobilized for want of components that would never be delivered. Dieter walked through the motor pool on a cold April morning. Rows of disabled tanks, Panthers, Tigers, even a few of the new King Tigers that had been rushed into production with insufficient testing. All of them broken. All of them silent. He stopped beside a Panther that had been towed in 3 weeks earlier. Transmission failure. A common problem. Normally a 3-week repair for a specialist team. But there were no specialists left. No spare parts. No hope of repair. The tank would sit here until Allied forces arrived. Then it would be scrapped or studied or put in a museum. A precision machine rendered useless by a single failed component that could not be replaced. Dieter placed his hand on the cold armor. Thought about his report. About the generals who had agreed with his analysis and changed nothing. About 17 months of watching everything he had predicted come true. He thought about his son. Lucas was dead. Killed 6 months ago. Eastern Front. His Panther had broken down during a retreat. The crew had awaited 2 days for a repair team. The Soviets had arrived first. Dieter had received the notification in November. A brief official letter. No details. Just confirmation that Oberschütze Lucas Volkmann had been killed in action. His son had died inside a broken tank exactly as Dieter had known he would. The knowledge had not made it easier. He pulled his hand away from the Panther and continued walking. Past rows of disabled vehicles. Past mechanics standing idle because they had nothing to repair with. Past a system that had finally completely broken down. Germany had built an army that required everything to work perfectly. And when things stopped working perfectly, the army stopped functioning. That was what his report had predicted. That was what had happened.
At the edge of the motor pool, Dieter saw an abandoned American Jeep, captured months ago. It had been used by depot staff for transportation until it developed engine trouble last week. No one had bothered to repair it, because in 4 days, maybe 5 American forces would arrive and this depot would be overrun. There was no point fixing anything anymore. Dieter approached the Jeep, looked at the engine. The problem was obvious: fuel pump failure. On a German vehicle, this would require diagnosis, disassembly, precise adjustment of internal components, and careful reassembly. 4 or 5 hours of work for a skilled mechanic. He wondered what the American procedure would be. He went to the administrative office. Among the scattered papers and abandoned files, he found what he was looking for.
An American technical manual for the Willys MB Jeep. The same type of manual he had studied 17 months ago in Tunisia. Same format, same philosophy. He opened it to the section on fuel system maintenance. The procedure was simple. Remove 4 bolts, disconnect 2 fuel lines, remove failed pump, install replacement pump, reconnect lines, replace bolts. Estimated time 20 minutes. Dieter stood there holding the manual. This simple document, these basic instructions. This was what had defeated Germany. Not superior tanks, not better soldiers, not brilliant generals. This manual, this philosophy, this approach to making war. He looked at the Jeep, then at the manual, then at the disabled Panther visible through the window. One vehicle could be fixed in 20 minutes if you had the part. The other could not be fixed at all. That was the difference. That was everything. Dieter closed the manual carefully, placed it in his coat pocket. Then he walked back to his office, sat at his desk, pulled out the notebook where he had been keeping his observations for the past 17 months, turned to a blank page. April 23rd, 1945. The war is ending. We have lost. Everything I predicted in my report has occurred. The generals knew it would. They did nothing. Perhaps they could do nothing. My son is dead. He died the way I knew he would. Inside a broken tank that could not be repaired because the system could not save him. I am still alive. I do not know why. Chance, perhaps. Or simply that mechanics are less likely to be in direct combat than tank crews. In a few days, American forces will arrive here. They will find this depot full of disabled German tanks. They will find vehicles that represent the peak of our engineering capability rendered useless by parts shortages and system failure. And they will understand what I understood 17 months ago in Tunisia. That we built precision machines. And they built sustainable systems. And that in war systems win. He paused, listened to the sounds outside. Distant artillery, getting closer every day. Then he continued writing. I am keeping the American Jeep manual, not as a trophy, as a reminder, as evidence of what defeated us. This simple document with its crude diagrams and basic procedures represents the future of manufacturing, the future of logistics, the future of war. Germany valued individual excellence. America valued systematic efficiency. Germany trained irreplaceable masters. America created replaceable procedures. Germany built things meant to last forever. America built things meant to last long enough. In extended industrial warfare, long enough is all that matters. He closed the notebook, set down his pen, sat in silence. Outside, the sound of artillery grew louder. The Americans were coming. They would arrive with their adequate tanks that always worked, and their simple procedures that anyone could follow, and their replacement parts that arrived when needed. And they would win. Not because they were better engineers, because they were better systems builders. Dieter looked at the photograph of his son one last time. Then he placed it carefully in his pocket, gathered his notebook and the American manual, and prepared for whatever came next. The era of precision craftsmanship was over. The era of systematic efficiency had begun, and there was nothing left to do but accept it. The war ended 3 weeks later. Dieter Volkmann survived. He was processed as a prisoner held for 6 months, then released. He returned to Stuttgart in October 1945. The city was in ruins. The Daimler-Benz factory where he had learned his trade was destroyed. The old workshop where master mechanic Hoffmann had trained him was gone. Everything from before was gone. But Dieter was still an engineer, and the world still needed engineers, just different kinds of engineers. In 1947, he accepted a teaching position at the Technical University of Munich. On his first day, he brought 2 items to class: the Panther Maintenance Manual, 60 pages on transmission repair alone, and the Sherman Maintenance Manual, 4 pages for the same procedure. He placed them side by side on the desk at the front of the lecture hall. 50 students watched him in silence. Gentlemen, Dieter began,
Look at these documents. One represents the approach Germany took.
The other represents the approach America took. One requires years of training to understand, the other requires weeks. One demands exceptional skill, the other demands simple execution. One produces perfect repairs when conditions are ideal, the other produces adequate repairs under any conditions. Germany chose the first path, America chose the second. He paused. Which approach won the war? The students looked uncomfortable. No one answered. I am not asking which produced better tanks, Dieter continued. I am asking which kept more tanks in the fight, which sustained operations when everything went wrong, which continued functioning when specialists were dead and factories were burning. The answer is the system that did not require perfection. He picked up the Sherman manual. This document changed the world, not because it was elegant, not because it represented superior engineering, but because it worked when nothing else did. Remember this lesson. The world we are rebuilding will not reward individual excellence the way the old world did. It will reward systematic efficiency, reliability, scalability. The future belongs to those who build systems that function with ordinary people following ordinary procedures, not to those who build precision machines that require masters to maintain. He taught that lesson for 20 years. Some students understood, some did not. But the ones who understood went on to shape the future. In 1962, a delegation of Japanese industrial engineers visited Germany. They were studying manufacturing techniques, learning from both German precision and American efficiency. One of them, a young man named Taiichi Ono, attended one of Dieter's lectures. After class, Ono approached the professor. Sir, may I ask a question about the American manual? Of course. You say it changed the world, but how? It is just a maintenance document. Dieter smiled. Come with me. He led Ono to his office, opened a desk drawer, removed the original Jeep manual he had kept since April 1945. This is not just a maintenance document, Dieter said. This is a philosophy, a way of thinking about production maintenance quality and human labor. The Americans understood something we did not, that in extended operations, whether war or manufacturing, sustainability matters more than perfection. They built systems that could continue functioning when key people were unavailable, when resources were scarce, when conditions were chaotic. That is what this manual represents. Ono studied the document carefully. We are trying to rebuild Japanese industry, he said quietly. After the war, everything was destroyed. We cannot afford to build the way Germany built. We cannot afford years of training. We cannot afford to depend on master craftsmen. We need to build the way America built. Then study this manual, Dieter said. Study the philosophy behind it. Apply it to your factories. Ono took notes. Years later, he would develop the Toyota production system, lean manufacturing, just-in-time delivery, standardized work, continuous improvement, all based on principles he first encountered in that American manual. The same principles that had defeated Germany. Dieter Volkmann died in 1979 at the age of 78. His notebook containing his wartime observations was donated to a military history archive in Munich. His report from 1943 was declassified in 1968. Historians who read it noted that every prediction had come true, every recommendation had been ignored, every conclusion had been correct. One military historian wrote, Volkmann saw the future with perfect clarity in November 1943. He documented it thoroughly. He presented it to senior command, and he was powerless to change anything. That is the tragedy. Not that he was wrong, but that he was right, and it made no difference at all. But that was not quite true, because while Volkmann's report did not change German military doctrine, his teaching changed something else. An entire generation of German engineers learned from him, learned that systems matter more than individual excellence, learned that sustainability beats perfection, learned that the future belongs to those who build for reliability, not those who build for brilliance. Those engineers rebuilt German industry, not on the old model of master craftsmen and precision optimization, but on the new model of systematic efficiency and modular design. By the 1970s, German factories were producing vehicles using American-style modular assembly. By the 1980s, German engineering had fully integrated the lessons Dieter had learned in that depot in Tunisia. The manual had won, not immediately, not obviously, but completely. In 1985, the Smithsonian Institution in Washington opened a new exhibit on World War II logistics. At the center of the exhibit, in a climate-controlled glass case, sat an original Sherman technical manual, TM 9-731B, the same type of manual Dieter had studied 42 years earlier. The placard read, "This manual represented a revolution in military logistics. By emphasizing component replacement over repair and by designing procedures for minimum skill requirements, American forces achieved availability rates that overwhelmed Axis powers despite often inferior individual equipment quality. The philosophy embodied in this document influenced post-war manufacturing worldwide, from automotive assembly to consumer electronics." Thousands of visitors walked past the exhibit every year. Most barely glanced at it. A boring technical manual in a glass case, not as interesting as the tanks or the aircraft or the weapons, but a few stopped, a few understood. A few recognized that this simple document had changed everything. In 2010, an engineer at Tesla was designing the battery replacement system for electric vehicles. He wanted a modular design, something that could be swapped quickly, something that did not require specialized training. His manager asked why. "Because that is how you scale," the engineer said. "You do not build systems that require experts. You build systems that work with procedures anyone can follow." "Where did you learn that?" "Engineering school. We studied the Sherman tank maintenance manual, the philosophy behind it." The manager looked surprised. "A World War II tank manual influenced electric car design. That manual influenced everything. Modular smartphones, data center servers, appliance repair. Anywhere you see remove and replace instead of diagnose and fix. That is the Sherman philosophy. The Germans built things to last forever. The Americans built things to be replaced quickly. In any system with scale, the American approach wins." The manager thought about this. "So we are still fighting World War II?" "No," the engineer said. "We are still learning from it." The manual sits in the Smithsonian today, pages yellowed, binding cracked, but still readable, still teaching the same lesson it taught in 1943, that wars are not won by perfection. They are won by systems, systems that function when everything goes wrong, systems that continue when experts are unavailable, systems that scale beyond what individual brilliance can achieve. Dieter Folkman understood this in November 1943. He documented it, reported it, taught it, and eventually the world learned. Not because his report changed military doctrine, but because his insight changed how we build everything. The manual that shocked German engineers in a rain-soaked depot in Tunisia became the blueprint for the modern world. Every instruction manual you have ever read, every some assembly required product, every drop-in replacement part, every modular component, every system designed for ordinary people rather than expert craftsmen, all of it traces back to that philosophy, to those three words: remove and replace. Germany built precision machines for masters. America built simple systems for everyone. And in the end, everyone beat masters. Because in extended operations, whether war or manufacturing or anything else that must scale and endure, the system that works with ordinary people will always defeat the system that requires extraordinary people. That was the lesson. The lesson Dieter learned too late to save his son. The lesson he spent his life teaching others. The lesson the world finally understood, not because it was elegant, not because it was beautiful, but because it was true. And in the end, truth wins. Systems win. Sustainability wins. The manual wins. Always.